Hello, Steve White, Steve Arts 89. Well, the Sidetrack guy's at it again. He says he's heard more from Insider Paramount, because apparently he has insiders, and it's not looking good for Kurtzman. They seem to have looked at Star Trek as a franchise and just said, we're putting all this investment, we're spending all this money on new shows, and they're not bringing new viewers, they're not bringing people to Paramount Plus, they're not buying merchandise. Why are we doing this for? The original shows make money. We keep selling them, in different formats and syndication and Blu-rays and everything, and merchandise, and people are still buying merchandise for the original Star Trek and toys and dolls and things. And we haven't spent money on that in decades. So why are we spending money on these new shows that are not bringing in new subscribers and not, making new fans buy merchandise? So why bother? And the talk is they're just going to let Kurtzman's contract end, and they're just going to not make Star Trek in the near future. And that, in a way, is good, because it gets rid of Kurtzman finally, and it at least leaves the opportunity for someone to come in and do new Star Trek later. But, of course, it means we don't get any more Star Trek. Now, the talk is, at least from him, was that they're considering continuing on with the reboot film. That was supposed to be, I think, set around the Romulan War, sort of post-Enterprise, and it was going to lead up to the building of the original Enterprise, and the launch of the Enterprise would be the end of the film. It was going to be like an anniversary celebration of Star Trek, and if it does well, it could be a trilogy or an ongoing series with Captain April, having adventures on that Enterprise, which I thought could have worked and could have been a unique film franchise. So there's talk that might still happen. They might still make the occasional film, but they're getting out of the TV business because they're really not making any money out of them. They're not doing what they were supposed to, and why they didn't realise this sooner, why they kept producing them when it wasn't working, I don't know. But the main problem is the fans are going to get the blame. They're just going to say, oh, well, Star Trek just isn't popular anymore, fans just don't like it, they don't care. They're not going to look at themselves and take responsibility and go, well, we weren't producing Star Trek. The show we were producing wasn't Star Trek, and it was turning fans off and not bringing new fans, because the things that interested people and made fans out of people are not part of the shows that we're producing and putting out. So why would we make new fans, and why would we please the old fans? They're going to just act like we don't exist. There just aren't enough Star Trek fans. It just doesn't appeal to people enough, when they weren't actually making it. They were trying to appeal to everyone but Star Trek fans. So that's the thing that worries me, that they won't actually get why it's failed, because all they need to do is get rid of Kurtzman and bring in someone who actually gets Star Trek and make an unapologetically Star Trek show, and it will attract the same sort of, phenomena that the original did, but it'll be, a smaller group of more intelligent people who like the show and follow it and spend a lot of money on merchandise, rather than the general audience sort of embracing it, which is what they're trying to do, is to get Star Trek, make it palatable for the general audience. And it's never really going to work, because people already have preconceived notions of Star Trek and Star Wars, and you can't get people who already think they know what it is to watch a new show. So that was never really going to work. I don't think that's ever really going to work. You're going to get a small amount of crossover sort of people coming in, the more general science fiction fans who are more open-minded, but didn't like Star Trek, may watch the new Star Trek, but that was all you were going to get. So, yeah. Interesting rumours, interesting idea. I don't mind the idea of Star Trek ending for a while. I just like to think that someone else would turn around and go, hey, this show used to make a lot of money, just because the last era, once all those people are gone and there's fresh eyes that can look at it objectively, who weren't involved in it, can look at it and go, well, that didn't work, but why don't we just make a Star Trek show that actually the fans like? Surely they'll watch it as much as the original, which was never really even a thought of the Kurtzman era. They always had their own agenda and their own just warped sort of idea of Star Trek being dead and needing to be made into something else to sort of be revived, which is the way that Kurtzman looked at it. But because he was never a Star Trek fan, the point of him being brought onto the films was because he didn't like Star Trek, and he was supposed to balance out Robert Orci, who was a huge Star Trek fan, and they were going to write the film and work on the films together, so it could be palatable to people who don't like Star Trek and people who love Star Trek. And then when you got rid of Orci, whatever his name was, and let Kurtzman just have it all and be in charge of it. You basically gave the keys of the kingdom to someone who hated, Star Trek and didn't want to be there and thought it was dead and thought the only way to save it was to basically turn it into everything else and make a Star Trek for like everyone. So eventually, you'll sort of have a Star Trek that everyone likes, but none of them will resemble Star Trek, and it's going to be about 20 different shows, none of which are going to really rate high on their own. So it just was an idea that never worked. So what I hope is that this is true, that they do end the contract, but then after a short turnaround, they realise just bringing someone else new and producing Star Trek that resembles the original Star Trek can make them more money than just continuing to make merchandise off the original, and that they can actually make a Star Trek that does what they were hoping that other one would do, that other era would do. But that may not happen. They may just say Star Trek doesn't work anymore and blame it on the fans and Star Trek itself, not sort of Kurtzman.